And hello again, and here we are for part 4 of my Moto Guzzi Reboot series on a very windy day. So we'll start off then by replacing this with this, a brand new starter motor, and it only cost £72. To change it was very simple. It's just held in place to the engine by these two long bolts here, and then there's two cables at the other end, one to power the starter motor and one to power the solenoid, so pretty simple to do. So with the old starter motor removed, I did have a look at it, and you can see here the pinion or cog that spins around when you apply power to it, and that should spin quite freely, but guess what, it doesn't. It's very stiff, it's very difficult to turn, so it definitely needs to be changed or at least rebuilt. Now at some point in the future I may well take this apart and clean it up and maybe re-grease the bearings, but right now there's no point doing it. I don't have time, and of course I've got my new starter motor on the engine, and so there's no point. And next I need to complete the work I started in part 3 to make a new bracket to mount the front indicators to the bike. And so let's get out of this wind and go in the garage and continue that work. And now I've got the aluminium indicator tube here welded to the aluminium plate which holds on the indicator. I also had these aluminium spacers welded in place too, because it just makes life easier just to keep everything together. So yeah, that's what you would see on the front of the bike. So next then I need to make a hole here in the centre to allow the wires to come out here from the two indicators, and to do that I've just got a file here. And I'm just going to file away until the hole is revealed big enough so I can pass through the wires. And now as you can see, we're just starting to break through to the hole in the centre of the tube. So a bit more filing and we should be done. And so having opened up this hole into the centre of the tube, I've now got enough room to pass through both wires of the two indicators. And now as you can see, I've got the indicators mounted on the front of the bike at last. I've given the tube here a quick polish, given it's aluminium, it should polish up quite well, but it's not quite as shiny as the chrome indicators. That'll do for now, but in the future at some point I would like to perhaps get these parts chromed. I know Camcoat do some kind of clever coating that looks like chrome but isn't, so I might look into that in the future. However, I would have preferred to shorten these stems and bring in these indicators a bit more. But I couldn't do that, because if I did, the indicators would be obscured by the forks, which means you couldn't see them very well, so where they are now is where they'll have to stay. And so my next job was to bleed the front brakes, now that I've got my new brake lines in place, and that's where I hit a problem. Because the piston inside this master cylinder is seized solid, as you can see, nothing's moving, that doesn't move at all. Now normally that wouldn't be such a problem, because rebuild kits are available at a good price, about £20, to rebuild these Brembo master cylinders. My problem is I have no idea what model this comes from, because I was given it about 10 years ago and I have no idea where it came from. So I've been looking on eBay to see if I can find one that looks just like this, and so far I've not been able to find one. However, it does have a couple of markings on it. It's got two numbers. It's got a 16 and a 4. The 16 indicates it's got a 16mm piston inside it, which is useful to know, and the 4 I have no idea. So what shall I do? Well, I think what I can do is buy a rebuild kit for a Brembo 16mm master cylinder, and hopefully it'll fit my particular model here, and if not I'll just have to give up and, I don't know, buy a new one or find something else to use. But yeah, it's actually something I should have checked years ago, but there's always been other things to do, and I was waiting until obviously I've got the new brake lines on the bike. Now that's done, it's time to move on and hopefully get this thing sorted out. As you can see here, it's absolutely solid, it won't move at all, so that needs a complete rebuild. It may even need to be binned. I mean, if it's so bad that it could be I can't use it anymore, in which case I'll have to find a replacement. And so next I need to sort out the front brake, and as we know, this has seized up. Now at first I didn't know where it came from, but I've since worked out this is from a Yamaha R1, and so hopefully I can buy a rebuild kit without a problem. But first I've taken it apart just to make sure it's okay, and that's where I've hit a big problem, because it's not okay. The piston is seized up solid in the bore of the body, and I think the bore's absolutely knackered, it's all corroded, and therefore I don't think this can be rebuilt. And so I've had to go and order a second-hand one, a good second-hand one off eBay, and that's just arrived. And so here we have the old seized up item, and here we have the new one from eBay. It's actually in very good condition. It's not brand new, but it's nearly new, and it's quite expensive. I think this was about £140, and it would have been even more expensive had it come with a dashpot and a lever, which it didn't. But that's okay, because I've got the lever here and a new dashpot from the old seized up master cylinder, so that's not really a problem. So now I just need to reassemble this, and hopefully it works okay, get it on the bike and get the front brakes bled at last. And so now I've reassembled and fitted and bled the front brake, and for the first time ever I've now got a working front brake, which is great news. So having sorted out the front brake, I've now got to sort out the rear brake. However, before I can bleed the rear brake, I've got to fit this, and this is a inline hydraulic brake switch. The problem I've got is it won't fit here because it's too long, it's too big, it'll hit the frame tube if I fit it like that. Therefore, I've had to fit the brake switch here on the rear caliper and run the two wires alongside the brake line all the way up to the electrics box. And so, having bled the back brake, I've now got working brakes both back and front, and that's great news. But there's no point being able to stop if you can't go, and at the moment I can't go because this old engine still hasn't fired up. So at the end of the last episode, I'd already changed over the ignition system to a brand new Dynatec electronic system, and I'm just getting a good bright spark on both cylinders. I'd also taken the carbs off, rebuilt them, cleaned them and fitted new seals where needed. So the question is, why doesn't it fire up? And I still don't know why it won't fire up. There could be still a problem with the carbs, or there could be a problem with the spark. It could be that I got the timing completely wrong and it's sparking at the wrong moment in the cycle of the engine. But I've checked it several times and I think it's okay. So my suspicions then turn to the carbs. Even though I've taken them apart several times, cleaned them, rebuilt them and so on, there's obviously something wrong somewhere. So I've ordered a couple of new parts for those carbs that have just arrived, and so let's go in the garage and see what those parts are and what difference they may make. In fact, it's just about to rain, I think, so it's a good time to go back indoors. And so here are those parts. We have a new float valve and a new seat, one for each carburetor. And so the reason why I've bought these two new sets of float valves is because if the float valves in the carbs at the moment are worn, it can cause one of two problems. If the current float valves stick open, it can cause the carbs to flood. And if they stick closed, it can cause the carb not to get any fuel at all, and so of course the engine won't start. Now I'm not sure if that's the case with my engine, but just in case, it's worthwhile changing them so that I eliminate that possibility. And so now I've got to remove the carbs yet again, remove the floats, remove the old float valves and their seats, and replace them with these new ones. And that's what's next. And so now here we have one of the carbs I've just taken off the bike, and I've also removed the float bowl. So here we have the floats, and I need to remove this to get at the float valve and its seat, which is right there. To do that, there's a pin here that goes through and hinges the floats, as you can see, and I think that just pulls out. Here we go, look, it just pulls out. Nothing is keeping it in place apart from friction. So there's the hinge pin, and now this should now be removed as so. That's all pretty easy and straightforward. And here we see the valve here attached to the bottom of the float valve. I think that just goes on like that, that's fine. And here we have the seat. Looks perfectly okay, but you never know. So I'm going to remove that now, replace it with the new seat and the new float valve. And so to remove the seat here, you need a 9mm spanner. unusual size, but there you go. So let's just unscrew this, hopefully it'll come out okay. There we go, no great problem. Come on. And that comes out quite easily. I'll just have a quick look at it with a magnifying glass and it looks okay. So all this might be a complete waste of time, but it does eliminate one potential problem. So there we have the old seat and the old valve, and now I'm going to replace them with my new ones. So now I'm just going to slide the hinge pin back in, like so. That seems okay, there we go. And that seems to be working okay. I will check the height of these float balls. You know, they should fall and rise at a certain height, which should tell me in the manual. So I need to find out what that is. There's a manual there, as you can see, and yeah, hopefully we can find that information and make sure it's correct before we put the float ball back on and get the carb back on the bike. And finally, before I put the carb back on the bike, I want to replace this. Now this is called a pipette in the manual. I'm not sure if you can tell on the video, but it's cracking all the way around here. So I've ordered myself some new ones here. They don't cost much money. And yeah, just one more thing not to worry about when it's back on the bike. And so with that pipette changed over, this carb can now go back on the bike. And then I've got to repeat the process for the other carb. And so I've just completed the work on the second carburetor, but I found another problem. And that problem is with this, the rubber manifold, because I found a split right around here. It's very difficult to see, but it is there. I don't think the split goes all the way through to the inside yet, but sooner or later it will do, and therefore I've got to replace this manifold and the one on the other carb with a brand new pair, which I'll have to order. And so now I've refitted the rebuilt carbs to the engine, I've put fuel in the carbs, and I've just wired up the batteries to the bike. And so let's see if all that works made any difference. So here goes then. If I connect up this earth, the starter motor should turn over and we should get power to ignition as well. So here goes. No, obviously not. However, I did notice that the new starter motor is now turning over the engine a lot quicker. But as you can see there, I didn't even get a pop or a bang. I've even injected fuel directly into the throats of the carbs, and still nothing's happening. So, the question is, why won't this damn engine fire up? And so, if it's not the carbs, it must be the ignition system, even though I am seeing a good spark on both cylinders. But that spark must be occurring at the wrong point. So maybe I've got something mixed up, and even though the timing appears to be right, it's not. So what I've done is I've just temporarily swapped over the HT leads left to right and right to left, just in case I got the wiring mixed up a little bit, which is possible because I'm using an aftermarket Harley specialised coil. It's not a standard coil at all, so I could have made a mistake, and rather than trying to rewire it, I'm just going to temporarily swap over the HT lead. So having done that, let's try again and see what happens. Oh. Wow, that's the first time it's ever popped and banged. And so I've now put some more fuel in the carbs, but I must remind you that I don't yet have a throttle working because there's a problem with the throttle. So I'm not sure if I could, I don't know, lift up the chokes maybe. I have just put some more fuel down the actual bores of the carb, so I might be flooding it, I don't know, but we'll try it out and see what happens. So here goes, fingers crossed we might get the engine to fire up. You never know, you never know. So let's see what happens. Double fingers crossed. Oh. Well, that's quite interesting. I was trying to pull the remnants of the cable here on both sides to try and, you know, mimic the fact that I can open the throttle up. Yes, that's quite interesting. It was trying to pop and bang. Maybe I've got too much fuel, and maybe I've got too little fuel. I'm not sure. Still fuel visible there. Bit more fuel. And then that's one more try in this configuration. Then I'll put the HT leads back to where I think they should be, and we'll see if that makes any difference. Who knows? Who knows? Now I've got a bit more, and now I know I've got fuel in the float ball. That might make a big difference. I've got a lot more fuel in there now. I've got these clear, transparent fuel lines, little stubby fuel lines that I can watch what's going on and see the fuel building up. So I know I've got enough. All right, last of the fuel, and then right. Okay, so they're now both full up. I've got about, you know, 6 inches of fuel now going down into the float balls that should mimic the fuel tank being in place. Right, so here we go then. Chokes off, and we'll see what happens next. If this doesn't work, I'll change the HT leads back to where they should be, and we'll see if that makes any difference. No. Right, I think as I say, I'll change HT leads back again. That was an interesting experiment, but maybe the real problem was I didn't have enough fuel in the float balls originally. So let me unplug these. Luckily the HT lines are long enough so they'll stretch from the one side to the other, which isn't always the case. Right, so we'll put them back to where they belong, and we shall try again. Right, so now I've put the HT leads back to where I think they should be, and I know I've got a decent header of fuel in the float balls. Now I've got these new transparent tubes. I can watch what's going on. So let's move the fuel away. I don't want to be there. Right, let's try again. If this doesn't work, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'll just have to start from first principles again and perhaps go and get some help from somebody who knows what they're doing, because I am running out of ideas. But let's give it a go one more time. In fact, not one more time, because I'll try it with the chokes on, then I'll try it with the chokes off. And we'll just try some different methods to try and get the damn thing to fire up. Oh, wow, fired up. That's amazing. So all that trouble I had was because there wasn't enough fuel in the float ball. I'm just using this little tiny pipette, this little tiny syringe to put fuel in there, and that wasn't enough. Now I unplugged that then because I didn't want the starter to work, but this works both the starter and the ignition. So as soon as I took it off, obviously the ignition stopped. So let me reconfigure my electrics so that when I unplug the starter, the ignition system's still working, and I think we might have cracked it. So that's great news. So let me just quickly, I will put this one. Come on. It's not always easy to work out what the hell's going on here, because I've got so many wires going here, there and everywhere. But yeah, that's the earth for the starter motor. This is the power to the ignition system, so that can stay plugged in when I unplug the starter circuit. So we'll just pop him on there. Oops, on the main battery. And now I have high hopes. Watch this. Wow. That is great news. Obviously I haven't got a throttle yet, so that's something I've got to work on next. A lot of smoke coming out of that damn engine, but then again it's not run for more than 10 years, and I do recall putting oil down the bores a long time ago just to make sure they don't get any problems, and that's just the oil being burnt off. So that is absolutely great news, because I have never heard this engine run before until this moment, and it did actually sound quite good. Actually, the good news is I think I'm running out of fuel too. I've run out of my spare petrol. My petrol tank's now empty. My can's pretty much empty. I think I might just go and, so we've got a little bit more fuel, we'll put some more fuel on the bike and we'll hear it running one more time. Right, so I'll put the chokes on again since the engine's cold, and we shall try again. And we just need to activate the starter motor and hopefully all will be well. And there you go. I think that's a good time to stop. I'm very happy with that, and the sun's come out and I am very happy indeed. So the problems I've been having all along could have been the problems with the float valves and the seats not allowing fuel into the carb, or it could have been I just didn't have enough fuel in the float bowls and not enough sort of back pressure. But I don't really care now because the damn thing's running at last. Bit smoky, but as I say, it's because I did put quite a lot of oil down the bores years and years ago. And so with the engine firing up at last, this is a great time to end this particular video on a high note for a change. But I've now got my indicators all set up. Oh, and by the way, I have changed over the rear indicators too to match the new front ones. I've got the brakes working back and front, I've got brake lights working. So yeah, we are getting there, and who knows, perhaps part 5 might be the end of this damn long 10-year project. But yeah, I wouldn't bank on it. You never know what problems we'll find next. So that's great news anyway. So that's it for now. So thanks for watching and cheers.